I am honored and pleased to introduce Brittany Brady.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you. It's early. We can dance. It's okay. It's Whitney. Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Susan. I am honored to be here in Central Texas, from North Texas, to speak with you all today. And so, the system is made up of people. Equitable change starts with us. As she mentioned, my name is Brittany Brady. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the CEO of the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity. I want to begin by thanking the members of my team who are here. No one does this work in a silo. I absolutely do not. And so thank you to my team members who made the journey here to support today. So I want to start off with a moment of vulnerability and transparency about a couple of brothers that really impacted the trajectory of the rest of my career. And these young men were at the largest middle school in Texas, where I did truancy interventions. And when I first got there, first day of school, fresh out of grad school, a 20-something who looked like a middle schooler, all of the other administrators said, "You have a hard list on your truancy list." So, of course, I listen to that, I take it in, and I'm processing what they're sharing with me, and I'm walking through the school and getting to know different students as the cool administrator, because kids automatically decide you're the cool one if you appear to be young. And so I see these two brothers who don't engage at all, right? And I didn't know they were brothers at the time, but they were kind of looking similar. They had a similar, somewhat disheveled appearance. One had tattered clothing. His shoes were kind of falling apart. The other was a little bit more buttoned up, but hunched over. And how many of us have seen students that look totally disconnected in our career? Raise your hand. So I went over to them and I introduced myself. And the first brother said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just saying hello. It's the first week of school. I noticed you all were over here. I wanted to say hello." He said, "No one says hello to us." And I internalized that, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, they were right. I have a hard list. And sure enough, these two students had been truant for the majority of their previous school year. Now, I didn't seek them out because I thought that they might be truant. I sought them out because I saw that they were disengaged. But over the course of that year, these students developed trust with me, right? They realized that I did care. And so instead of going to their traditional classrooms, they would come and do their classwork in my office. Instead of going home at the end of the day, I would order dinner for them and make sure they had dinner to take home. And instead of them coming in their disheveled clothing, I put together a uniform closet to make sure that they were able to, one, be in compliance, because actually that's why they were truant the previous year. They didn't have clean clothes. And also because they needed to know that someone cared enough to care about how they got to school, what happened when they got there, and what happened when they left. I share this because if I would have looked at their stats, their numbers, their metrics of their grades and attendance and how they showed up, many people had already decided that they weren't worth investing in. And many people actually told me that I was wasting my time. They're not going to listen. They're not going to come. They're not going to persist. The older brother was already 16 in the 8th grade. But by the end of the year, the younger brother advanced to the next grade, and the older brother persisted and was able to complete 8th grade. I share that because sometimes it takes us seeing the human to really get to what we hope to see in terms of the outcomes. And so I want to ground us all in thinking about who you bring into this room at this moment in time. That student, that loved one, it could be anyone, but who are you thinking of when you're thinking of supporting students' trajectory and thinking of how to impact students across this ecosystem? We all have at least one. Some of us have a lot. I have a lot. But we have to always remember that those numbers represent a human. And so we'll go through a little journey today. This is our NAEP equation of UA squared. And we're going to begin, mostly from unaware. You just met me. Nice to meet you. Now you know I like Whitney Houston, right? But other than that, you don't know much, right? And this is a process that we use to talk about any bit of learning, especially in equity practice. There's a lot of hesitancy about wanting to get it right and wanting to make the right choices, but everybody starts off at unaware at a certain point. And then we move into awareness, right? Okay, so now over the course of the conversation, you'll learn more. You'll have a little bit more of an idea of kind of what we do and information that I want to share with you. And you move to understanding. Your synapses will start firing off. Everything will start hitting off on the pistons. Maybe the breakfast tacos will help with that, right? But as you reach understanding, then you can kind of start grappling with things. You'll have questions popping up in your mind. And then lastly, action, right? My hope is that you leave here today, this whole conference is about igniting change. And change really does start with us. And so I want to remind you of your power, and hopefully that understanding leads you to action that then impacts the entire ecosystem. You guys have a lot of heavy hitters here in Central Texas with E3 Alliance here informing your insights, and so hopefully this will help. Okay. So I want to ground us in this about what we can control, right? We're thinking about those students that we've had. We're thinking about things that we've done, but also, what can't we control, right? There's a lot that's happening in education. How many of you all are filled with energy about education right now? Okay, good for y'all. I'm struggling. It's hard. And we can say when things are hard, right? So my sphere of concern, this outside, it's vast, right? But here in the center, where you see what you can control, that's what I want us to center ourselves in today. Right? This is a quote from Stephen Covey, very prominent thinker. We make progress when we focus on what we can control and where we can influence, rather than on those things which we cannot. And that's what I want to remind all of us today. And so I'm going to show you something that you cannot control. E3 Alliance, thank you so much for providing this slide. You guys will probably see more about this throughout the day. So this is a spoiler alert, but it ties in really nicely with my experience and with things that I've seen. So as you can see, let's see if this has a, these are chronic absence rates in all grades across pre-K through 12, right? 2019, we already had an absence issue. I saw it very prominently in middle school. As you can see, when parent involvement kind of dips down right here around the middle school age, you tick right on up in terms of attendance issues. As you can see, our biggest issue is here. And that's 12th grade, 11th and 12th grade year. That's when people are making post-secondary choices. That's when people are deciding where they're going to move forward. And that's also when students have decided, no one cares about me here. So I'm just going to go do something else. Like Susan shared, 12%. That percentage is really, really important to ground ourselves and to remind ourselves of, because if students do not get a credential, if you are not persisting, if you do not find something to do in this zone right here, then your outcomes are statistically not good, right? We have higher rates of poverty and all kinds of adverse outcomes when we think about not accessing all of our educational options. I want to take a moment here to say I'm being very intentional when I say all of our educational options. I am not a college for all girl. I am a post-secondary options for all person. And so reminding us that sometimes in this 11th and 12th grade piece, we can be helping people find certifications or a different route to wherever they're hoping to go if they don't want to go a college route. And so as we see, the pandemic exacerbated what was already happening. We also know that a lot of students are actually just missing from the rolls. All across the country, especially here in Texas, we're seeing that there are some students that they just have not, as they say, reclaimed. All I can think about, again, that sphere of influence, my sphere of concern is what's happening to those students? How many of those are like those brothers that I had? Are they eating? Are they sleeping? Are they safe? Are they okay? What's happening with them? What can we do to bring them back into the fold within our educational system? And so as you can see, income does not help this issue, right? Low-income students considerably experience chronic absence higher than their peers. 38% of low-income students, to be exact. I want to take a moment to sit with this as we think about the differences. Why might low-income students have higher rates of chronic absence? And I'll give you a few examples from my career. So as a truancy officer, but I never called myself that, I had to find out why students weren't coming to school. And a lot of people assumed they just don't like school, they don't want to come. That's what the educators who had them on their rolls told me. And so, okay, I'll go with that hypothesis. And then I started to do home visits. And they thought I was crazy. They're like, you're doing home visits? They don't even come to school. They're probably not at home. Well, some of them weren't, but some of them were. And what I found out was some of them had chronic illness, and their parents were not fluent in English, and so they didn't fill out the adequate paperwork. Imagine getting a summons to go to truancy court and your child is in the hospital, right? I also found out that a lot of the students were caring for other siblings, especially younger siblings that weren't yet school age, and so they couldn't leave, but the students couldn't leave. If their siblings couldn't leave because their parents were working. Somebody has to watch the children. And then there was another group that had to find a way to work. And they're 13 and 14, a little over age for middle school, but they were still on my rolls. And they had to figure out a way to support their family. Now, yes, they should technically be in school, but how hard was that for me to say, I know you just paid your light bill with your child's income, but instead you have to bring them to school. That's a tough conversation to have. Low income is a broad stroke, but there's a lot of things that are impacted by the amount of income someone has. And so, where is the starting point? So the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity has something that we call the PIPE process, which is Program Improvement Process for Equity. Try saying that 5 times fast. And so beginning is exploring and taking inventory. So what I just showed you was the data that are available for you in terms of chronic absence, right? And so what we might do with the partner is say, okay, looks like your low-income students are having adverse outcomes. Have you looked at this in a deeper dive? Have you disaggregated the data? How have you looked at the intersections? What exactly is happening with this group of students? And then we go forward to discover, review and analyze, exploring root causes and analyzing those, right? Root cause of truancy, obviously we see a correlation between income. If you think that you can't go to school because you have to make money, then that's obviously a very clear connection, right? And then select. Research strategies that say, okay, I want to try something new. A lot of you all are systems leaders or aiming to be systems leaders or just in the room to learn more, right? All of us are capable of researching strategies to include more students. What I did in this setting, obviously I got them uniforms, et cetera, but my broader strategy was assembling an attendance committee. We looked at the attendance every 6 weeks, and we said, okay, are the same students' names showing up? If they are, how are we calling them back in? And by my second year, we actually decided that we needed a school within a school. We found out that some of the educators who were already on their rolls, certain teachers had higher rates of absence. And I got curious about that. My background, my master's degree was a research-based degree. So I had to wonder, what exactly is happening in these teachers' classrooms? And so I started asking the other students. And you know what they said? Oh, whenever this teacher sees so-and-so, they said, there go my metrics for the year. That was my point. I'm glad you did it. And that was a consistent thing across the board, right? Would a student want to come to a classroom where the teacher says that the moment they see you? Or how about the students that overheard those administrators saying, don't even bother with them. They're not going to listen to you. They're taking advantage of you. Anybody who's been in the classroom knows kids hear everything. They pay attention to everything. They pick up on the dynamics. They heard it. And so I said, okay, let's change their schedules. And the guidance counselors loved me and then hated me and then loved me again. But we put all of the educators who were willing to have those additional services for students all on the same schedule. And so all of my truant students had a group of the same teachers. I had 2 teachers of every subject matter, right? All of a sudden, we started to see they were coming back to school. Why? Because they knew, 1, it was a welcoming environment, and 2, everybody else in this classroom has been skipping for the whole year. So we have a lot to talk about, right? And then, so that was my high impact strategy, and then after I enacted and implemented, the school actually ended up adopting that for all overage students, right? So most of my truant students were overage. They were supposed to be out of the school 2 or 3 years prior. And so once they saw the intervention working, they said, okay, well, let's go through the roles and let's go ahead and get proactive for the following school year. And we know that we'll have their schedules already developed. And do you know that out of, I think I had 10 16-year-olds, like 15-year, I mean, they were overage. It was a lot of them. They all started to persist. And in fact, some of them would start to ask about other programs they could do because they said, you know what, actually, I really just need to get my GED, or I really just want to go to Job Corps. And we supported them along that pathway if they were old enough. But the main thing was this piece of exploring and taking inventory and discovering. I had to remove my assumptions. I had to get out of my own way. I had to release my emotions around the horrible things that I heard educators saying about children. I know none of you all do this, and I know we all strive to never do it, but we all have our days. And so because I was able to get curious, I tried something new that didn't get me a lot of friends in the beginning, but did have the outcome that we hope for in the end, right? Which is students persisting, and them going on and deciding for themselves what their future will look like. This clicker is not my friend. Okay. And so how do we foster belonging, right? So what we did in those classrooms was exactly this, right? So the first thing is involvement. How are we involving them in the norms of the classroom? What are we talking about? How are we cultivating a space that sees their cultural differences, right? This was a primarily Latina environment. And so are you doing Hispanic Heritage Month? Do you understand that Dia de los Muertos is a very serious time for some students, and so maybe we should have a moment of silence or have a celebration in our classroom? How are you supporting when their tia brings you tamales? Are you saying thank you? Or are you looking at it like, oh, I've never had these before and I don't want it, right? Students remember that. And then attachment. How attached are they to what this environment is offering me? So when I know that this administrator has looked out for me enough to say, I'm gonna change your schedule and I'm gonna figure out a way to get you into classroom environments that are supportive of your growth, now you're attached to the outcomes. Because you know someone vied for you. Someone tried to help you along the way. And then this third bit, commitment, which I'm going to talk about on a later slide, which really focuses on how are you involving that classroom community in the decision-making process? How are you developing commitment? What's your commitment as the person that's in that environment? And then also, how are you fostering their commitment? This is a key opportunity for engaging student and learner voice, right? How are you, especially as systems leaders, allowing for that variability for your educators? Can they co-create the norms of the classroom, or is that an edict from the district or from the school or whatever, right? Are students involved in that decision-making process? Maybe the students don't want deficit-based rules, like you will not, right? Maybe they will prefer to have things saying what we will do, what we hope for. And then lastly, beliefs. How are you incorporating the belief system of the room? Now, I am a church girl, admittedly. My parents are both ministers, so I'm not talking about who believes in what in terms of religiosity. I'm talking about what they believe to be possible, and how are you supporting that? And so here I have one of the favorite things that I've learned from a youth leader, which is the Heart's Ladder of participation. A lot of people act like student and learner voice conversation is something new, something kind of radical that we're doing, but it's not. This ladder of participation is from the late 80s, and it's from a child psychiatrist named Roger Hart, who talks about the ways that we can incorporate youth and learner voice. And so down here at the bottom is where we don't want to be. Manipulation. Adults using young people to support their own projects and pretend they are the result of young people's inspirations. How many of us have seen a student that ends up getting called up to the principal's office and they have to do the announcements and they read off what the principal put, right? I'm not saying the principal is a manipulator, but I'm saying that child didn't have anything to do with what they read. They just wanted to hear it in a child's voice. And then up here at the top, we have Young People's Initiative, decisions made in partnership with adults. A lot of adults are uncomfortable with this because they always say, oh, kids come up with anything. They're kids at the end of the day. Have you given them the opportunity? Have you heard what they have to say? You might be surprised. Every classroom environment I've ever been in, all of my students determine the norms. They tell me what they want to do. And it's not because I'm a pushover, it's because if you're going to be here and we're all going to be here together, you all outnumber me. What are you agreeing to, right? And so here we have our culture wheel, which is where we spend a lot of time at NAPE. And I'll pause after this culture wheel for a couple of questions. But here at the beginning, we have something called micro messages, right? We all develop them. It's a brain science thing, and if you want to go into a deeper dive, I can nerd out about that all day. But you have cultural stereotypes and bias that then lead us to have micro messages. I tell a funny story about a lady in church who used to chew Big Red, and she did not like little young Brittany. And so now whenever I smell Big Red, I have a visceral reaction. I have a bias against Big Red chewers. Sorry to Big Red chewers in the room. But that's the micro message that I extend. And then anybody who has Big Red, they're going to accumulate disadvantage with me, right? Because I'm like, I don't know, you might be like her. And then we get to self-efficacy, right? Now I'm projecting onto the Big Red chewers that, you know what, I don't really like you. Maybe you might not think that you have the efficacy to engage with me. And then that changes their behavior and repeat, right? This little wheel goes around and around again with all of our interactions and how we share with people. And so we'll take a moment to process what I shared about the brothers and about what we can do to ignite change, those really troubling statistics about absenteeism and what that really means for what students are encountering and what that means for our future. That many students outside of school is going to really impact what the ecosystem will look like in the next few years. And so I'll pause there and say thank you to you all for being an engaged audience and for thinking. I'm seeing your thinking caps on, which means that you're really, really ready for all the data E3 is going to offer you today. But also, if anyone has any questions for me, after you kind of process what I shared, I'd be happy to answer a couple of questions at this time. Did you see my slide deck? I have another slide for you. Okay, so that one was the culture wheel. This one goes a little bit more deeply into what micro messages actually are, and then I'll double back if this doesn't answer your question, okay? So micro messages are small, subtle, unconscious messages that we send and receive when interacting with others, right? Verbal, paraverbal, you see all of those there at the top. The last three are especially salient for me because the context and the omission and praise and criticism are key in terms of micro messages. So if a teacher comes up to a student in the middle of the lunchroom and says, hey, you didn't submit your assignment on time, that context now has a different micro message than had you pulled them to the side after class, right? Now you're putting them on the spot, you're saying something with your mouth, but the context has them perceive it differently. And so something that we can do as we're constantly sending and receiving these messages is transferring those from micro inequities, which is making people feel excluded, devalued, etc., to feeling valued, included, encouraged, and intentional. And that's just by following that wheel, thinking about what we're doing, thinking about what we're saying and what we're not saying, and being mindful of how to confront our own bias, stereotypes that we all hold, to really think through how can we really work on supporting the self-efficacy and belief of belonging for all of the students and learners in this space. And so I'll double back to that. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. That's the crux to me of micro messages, right? People say a lot of things. The context, how they say it, when they say it, why they say it, what they don't say, all contributes to, oh, this is weird. This piece that we see here, which is behavior, right? So imagine if no one has that point of interruption about thinking about their micro messages, right? Now behavior is only going to continue to potentially decline. And that's not, to me, all on the student. That's also on the environment, right? If I'm constantly receiving a message that I'm not welcome, how much am I going to strive to still be in this environment, right? What can I do as an educator or systems leader to focus on this part right here about what micro messages are present in a space and how it accumulates advantage or disadvantage? Because the flip side of that is that certain students are automatically seen as smarter, better, more capable, right? Which is why we have to focus on what those cultural stereotypes and bias do to impact the micro messages that we are putting out and then subsequently receiving. I think I have time for one more question.
When was NAEP? Okay.
Okay, the NAEP Education Foundation was founded in 2002, but NAEP is a little bit older than that because it's a membership organization. So it came out of a role called Sex Equity Coordinators, which is a very dated term purposely. But essentially the focus was really when Title IX came out and making sure that girls had more access to career and technical education. Since that moment in time, it has now expanded to be more intersectional, to think through what can we do to make sure all students have access to high-wage, high-skill careers, and what gets in the way of that. That's really kind of where our secret sauce is saying these things can be shifted. There are solutions possible. We like to say we operationalize equity strategies and equity intentions, and that's really what we seek to do via the process that I shared with you, and then also this micro-messaging bit is part of a larger training that I believe some folks in the room have participated in. We have an expert micro-messaging person right here. But yeah, that's really what our focus is on, and it's been a long-standing thing. Equity is not new, it's been around for a long time. So thank you for asking that. Well, thank you all so much. I hope you all remember that we are all capable of igniting change. I hope you all remember that our sphere of influence may be small, but it's still impactful. Those brothers, their lives are different, not necessarily because of me, but because of what they thought they could do and what they were supported in doing. So never forget that that power is in all of us, and a lot of times people see that power in educators, and it makes them fearful. And so don't let it make you fearful. Let it make you feel proud and courageous to ignite change. Thank you all so much.